I must commend the current government for presenting a very comprehensive proposal. Yes.
And you've got the 30 million people here in Malaysia.
Right.
And on top of that, we're more multiracial.
We're going to talk about inflation, and if you can't address inflation, increase that salary.
I couldn't understand why there were more and more, especially young girls, but it's not only the young girls, who were doing this.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Headlines. My name is Amalina Kamal.
And I'm Hazrin Hassan. Today, we first take a look at the recently announced Bumiputra Economic Transformation Plan 2035, or PuTERA35, launched by Prime Minister Dato Sri Anwar Ibrahim. This ambitious plan is designed to elevate Bumiputra development and position Malaysia as a regional economic leader, all while ensuring inclusivity and equitable growth across the nation.
We'll also discuss the government's recent announcement of a phased salary hike for civil servants up until 15%, that is, the first significant increase since 2012. Now, while this move aims to address wage disparities and boost morale, it also raises pressing concerns, especially when it comes to economic viability, long-term sustainability, and the broader impact on the private sector. Now, to help us unpack these critical issues, we have with us Professor Dr. Bajawai Badai. Welcome, Professor, to Beyond Headlines.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now,
Very pleased to have you on the show with us today. And also, Amalina, today with us we have Corsten Smith, founder and author of We Are All Stakeholders, Datuk Shirin and Zahara Muhyiddin, who's here to talk about online harms and the urgent need for concerted efforts to protect the mental health and safety of our children in the digital age later on in our second segment. Datuk, welcome to Beyond Headlines.
Thank you for having me. If you don't mind, I'd rather just be Shireen.
Okay,
of course.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, yeah, welcome to the show, Shireen.
pleasure to have you,
Pleasure
Shireen.
to have you here, yes. So, Shireen, just very shortly, you've been a long time strong advocate of corporate governance best practices and environment, social and governance, or ESG as it's more commonly known. And now today on internet safety, particularly when it most affects our young ones, this call to action is absolutely necessary, isn't it? I mean, it's almost overdue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what people don't realize is that when you look at the ESG framework or the sustainability framework, and you look at, environment gets a lot of headlines today, and rightly so. Governance has always been part of the needed or the requirements for any markets to move forward, because you need transparency in processes. Now, the S portion, which can be various aspects within it, you do have the S, which includes safety and online safety. And today, when you look at some of the issues we're facing societies where you have so many people who are very angry. There's a lot of hate now. And of course, then there are the children. How are the children growing? How are they dealing with all these mental health issues? And these are some of the things that I'm going to be talking about that has really pushed me to launch an online safety impact fund, because I feel that this is something we really need to start creating awareness. It'll be a different type of fund, but it is something that needs to be done.
Right. Great. Thanks, Shirin. We'll get more into that shortly. But first, let's discuss the Bumiputra Economic Transformation Plan 2035, or PuTERA35, which I'm sure you'll have plenty of insights to share with us as well, Shirin. But so, Amalina, I'd like you to...
Yeah, sure. So we've got PuTERA35. Now, why 35? Because the plan, I suppose the deadline is up until 2035, and it is a highly ambitious one. Right, Professor? Do you think the government's projection is actually realistic? And what are the, economic risks that we're supposed to look into to achieve that deadline?
Okay. First of all, I don't really look at it as ambitious.
Okay.
Because, for example, I mean, today the Bumiputra professional account for about 62%, and we are trying to achieve 70%. That's 7% in 15 years. Then we today our Bumiputra equity ownership is about 18%, and we are targeting 30%. Okay, that figure is almost double, but taking into account that Bumiputra is 70% of the population, I mean, the numbers are big, so the chances of achieving that is actually easier. And in other things like, for example, we are just trying to improve our position. Our ratio of income today between Chinese and Malay is 0.7 to 1, and we want to improve that to 0.9 to 1. It is marginal improvement. But nevertheless, I must commend the current government for presenting a very comprehensive proposal. It is comprehensive because it is done systematically, taking into account the history, the current position, and what they will do with the 3 trusts and the 9 drivers and so on.
Right. But observers are saying what makes the PuTERA35 special is that it's going to incorporate corporations across ethnic lines. But the real burning question is, of course, like when we emphasize on a certain group within the Malaysian society, could it actually create or worsen economic disparities between the actual ethnic groups of concern here?
For example, the new economic plan was initiated in 1970, and by 1990 it was hoped to achieve 30% participation by Bumiputra. And after 20 years, it was not achieved. In fact, we went sideways in some aspect. So, in our case here, we are so left behind. The Bumiputra is right now, for example, the average income is about 4,500, and compared to about 9,000 for the Chinese. It is almost impossible for the Bumiputra to actually be better than the Chinese in 14 years.
But certainly the data here, we're talking about a sampling of a majority of a population versus like a minority, right? So when it comes to like opportunities, what is the indicator, especially when it comes to plans such as this, to be a success or a failure?
Yeah.
How do we measure that actually?
That's why we cannot have a specific target period. This was what happened in the first DEB, the new economic policy, when we put a 20 years period and we work hard to achieve that. At the end of the 20 years, then we look back and we decided that this failed. Actually, it didn't fail, because by 1990 we saw that the academic achievement of the Bumiputra has improved tremendously, but they were lacking behind in terms of equity participation, in terms of income and so on. But the same thing here. We should not have a target, specific target on the
success
percentage,
matrix. Okay.
But what we should have is a sustainable program that will consistently take care of the Bumiputra,
Right.
so that it will be a sustainable program.
Just to add before we go into the next line of questioning, so the PuTERA35 is an 11-year initiative designed to elevate the economic standing of the Bumiputra by increasing not just the participation but ownership as well as control in the national economy. Now, the plan aligns with Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim's broader national goals like the Madani economy as well as the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda.
Yes.
So now we want to talk about inclusivity, right?
Right. So all this talk about sustainability, obviously, like you said earlier, perhaps the the target of the earlier NEP wasn't quite successful in many relative terms. I think we can put it that way, right?
Yes.
So now to keep this going and to make sure that it is sustainable, in terms of inclusivity, now PuTERA35, it promises to uplift all segments of the Bumiputra community. This would include the ethnic minorities in Sabah Sarawak and the Orang Asli. So, Professor, how does the plan ensure that these often overlooked groups are not left behind and that development is genuinely inclusive, plus to make it sustainable?
This is the point. The point is that we have the target should be the beneficiary of this program, the stakeholder. So if we make sure that all our economic program have a specific target for this disadvantaged group, the Sabah Sarawak, the Orang Asal and so on, then we will make sure that they are taken care. What worries us, for example, before in the 90s was after they stopped the new economic policy, they said that we cannot afford to continue with this because the cake was not big enough to be divided. So let's make the cake bigger. And that's when we really ram the economy and go all out to improve the economy. And at that time, we virtually neglected the Bumiputra and the disadvantaged group. Why? Because we want to make the cake bigger. But what happened at the end of that in 2010? Then we look back again and we saw that yes, our cake has gotten bigger, but it's not big enough. So they go on again, another round. So in the end, it does not reach anywhere, and those that are neglected continue to be neglected.
But on making the cake bigger, we've also moved on from agriculture-based economy, especially for the Bumiputra now, to more modern. A lot of the Bumiputras, they moved out to cities. We're no longer still left behind in a way in the kampungs, in the villages. So perhaps the needs and the demands also must, or rather the policies must be created in such a way that it will cater to these needs and demands.
Right.
Is that going to affect the cake?
Yeah, okay. Actually, Malaysia has developed so rapidly in the last 70 years. And we are, in 2022, we were declared as the best economy in the world because we were developing at 7% per annum average growth annually for 45 years. No other countries in the world achieved that record, basically. But that development was because we were relying on foreign direct investment, and there were only like 10,000 companies in Malaysia that are responsible in pushing our economy to that level. There are over 1 million businesses from the micro business, small and medium scale industry that were struggling. They were struggling, and they employ more than 60% of employees, but they are only contributing less than 35% of the NEP. And so they actually reduce their share of income with the employees. Before it was 37%, then it became 32%. So will things get worse? We do not know. But the economy Madani is projecting, but by 2030, we must achieve 45% of sharing between the employers and the employees in terms of income, for example.
Right. But I just want to add, because the government has spelled out like three, I suppose, key ways here, especially when it comes to PuTERA35 in driving economic mastery and helping to alleviate, the Bumiputra's, I suppose, social status and competitiveness here. So one is in strengthening the nation's economy, of course, not just in raising competitiveness, but talent development and wealth creation. And then second would be improving governance, a focus on better governance and service delivery by involving private sectors, GLCs, and government institutions to have a more cross-collaborative sort of initiative. And third is promoting social justice.
Right.
Now, the third area of concern here, promoting social justice, sometimes it gets a little bit grey, right? Because the needs vary, depends on the community you belong to. Professor, I know you're an economist, but how important is the social aspect here when it comes to driving economic, feats, economic successes here?
Yes. Yes, it is very important. In fact, well, if we look at the economy, in the end, economic is about people, about household. It is household in the economy that is actually accounting for the whole economy. But of course, the household will then be divided into the employers, into the government, into the voluntary sectors, and so on. But the problem always is if the cake is so skewed to the group that now group themselves as this producer or the entrepreneur,
Right.
then the equation has got mismatched, and so. Social protection is very important. We need to enhance our social protection system and learn how it is done in other countries. I mean, in Norway, when they discover oil, they immediately put aside all this fund into the oil fund, and today this was 10 trillion. We could have done the same way because we discovered oil almost at the same time. But it is never too late. I mean, we still have the government-owned company and Petronas, and if the government is serious, that can be a better approach. Create a real social protection institution and create this endowment fund, and park all the government-owned asset into that, and it will generate income every year, maybe to the tune of 50 to 70 billion, which is more than enough to take care of the disadvantaged group, the needy group, for example.
Are we also talking about the non-Bumis here as well? I mean,
Of course,
okay.
this is not only about Bumiputra. That is why I prefer the word inclusivity than the new economic policy, because inclusivity means that everybody have the right. I mean, every single citizen have the same right.
Now, because you mentioned Norway, right? So their welfare system over there is paternalistic, as in it's universal. Everyone gets, a fair piece of everything. You get paternal leave, maternal, just as many days as a mother would get for maternal leave. And, you're very well taken care of by the government. But there's also that difference in terms of how the population is made up. You've got, I think, maybe over 5 million, maybe fewer people in Norway.
Yes.
And you've got the 30 million people here in Malaysia. And on top of that, we're more multiracial. So yes, we can probably, we could have gone that route. We could have used, all that money from the oil and the sort of income and royalty that we could have made from that and put towards that. But then how would it work in our context?
Okay. For right now, I mean, every year we spend more than close to 80 billion now on all the subsidy and all the social program, and that has in a way disturbed our national budget, and that has created the deficit budget, and for example, during the pandemic, we spent we increased our loan by more than 300 billion, I think, and that is seen as a disaster in the long term. And what we should have been doing is that separate that subsidy and assistance that they want to give to the needy group outside the budget. It should not be in the government budget. After all, it is not the government administrative cost. So it is for the people. So if we have this social protection system, and we created the fund, and the fund, for example, easily we can create a fund of about maybe 7 or 800 billion size, which will generate 6% return, and every year we will get 60 billion. For example, today we have this subsidy program that the government is initiating. They only spend about 12 billion a year. So with 12 billion, it helps every one of the 9 million needy group in Malaysia. Not much, 1,200 ringgit a year, but at least there is some credible program.
Right. But coming back to PuTERA35, right? Because realistically, I mean, I just want to echo what you just mentioned. We still have like the vast majority of Bumis not necessarily earning the ideal amount of like average income per month in a sense. So usually it boils down to whether or not they base themselves in the urban areas or the rural areas. So with this consideration, what sort of like concrete steps must we look into in eventually leveling the playing field for all?
Our problem today is our workers' community. We have more than 17 million now of workers' community, and out of that, 70% are regarded as unskilled workers because they only have SPM or below. 70%. So it is more than 10 million, and they are now trapped in the middle income trap. The median income is only 2,600 ringgit. So 2,600 ringgit is not enough because the minimum cost of living in the urban area especially is 3,000 ringgit. Bank Negara said a family with 2 kids should have 6,000 ringgit at least. So if and because of that, 70% of this workers group are actually below the poverty level. Of course, the government servant is doing well now that they have lifted their income from minimum. Before this, they can start as low as 800 ringgit per month, but now it is 2,200 ringgit. So it is just above the poverty level. But the private sector, the tourism industry in Malaysia, for example, the average salary of the workers is 1,200 ringgit. Yesterday I was with the kindergarten teachers. They are earning 1,100 ringgit a month. And the PASCA, the also run on voluntary basis, and the teachers are earning 700 ringgit a month.
I mean, I have one last question before we go into the next topic of interest. But I mean, realistically, PuTERA35 is a national initiative. I mean, national development drive, right? But should the federal government work closely, I think better, if I may add, with the state government in driving this initiative? For instance, we are already seeing I won't say emancipation, but sort of a decentralization of the Sarawak government in boosting their own local economy, right? So how can the federal government work very closely with the state authorities here?
Yes, I would say that the Sarawak government is doing very well. They are bold in their effort in making so many initiatives. They bought their own jet just to send their local product to San Francisco, for example. So we need every state to be given more
autonomy
to work on that way, and each state also have resources. I mean, now we are moving into this new resources that is the rare earth, for example, which is poised to worth trillions of dollars. So each state will have a capacity to build their own state, and this can be a big potential, a better potential. I think.
So if we remove the bureaucracy, we can actually achieve this.
Yes,
Mhm.
it has been proven in Sarawak, and now,
Yeah.
of course, Selangor has proven it,
Yeah.
and Penang has done it so well.
And much more than just a safety net, would you say?
Yes.
More. But is there anything you'd like to add to the discussion, Shirin?
Well, I mean, I think that the professor has brought up a lot of very valid points. You know, if you take a look at some of the things that we can do, and we're able to do it, and if we, you know, you just take a look at Sarawak, some of the initiatives they have taken, they are taking a very long-term view for their future children, and the likelihood with some of the steps they're taking, I think Sarawak is going to be the leader for
Mhm.
many of the other states to follow.
Right.
And it's being a little bit brave, it's being a little bit clear what they want, which areas and which aspects they want to move into. So we might see a whole new dynamic force
Right.
In the future.
And it's not necessarily seen as an attack to the federal institution, right? It
No.
should be
No,
seen
no.
as a
Compliment.
Compliment, yeah.
Absolutely.
Leading
Mm.
by example, I see it. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
We should follow it.
Mhm. Anyway, now shifting gears to another major announcement, Prime Minister Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim also made a big kind of like notification, especially that was celebrated across all civil servants, a phased salary hike with the increase of up until 15%. Now that's a lot, and this is a much awaited one, right? Because it's since 2012, and that's like well over a decade. Now, Professor, can Malaysia actually afford this sort of substantial salary hike? That's the first question of concern here.
Affordability is relative to income, relative to the future growth of the economy. Of course, I mean, if you look at the micro level, we have over 1.7 million government servants now.
Yeah.
And when we compare this with the total population, actually the ratio of government servant to the population is so skewed. I mean, our ratio is less than 20 compared to our neighbor at 1 to 40, and the developed nation can be at 1 to 100. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we are lavish on the government servant? Actually, no, because this 1.7 million is lumped up from all different services. We have the army, the policemen in there, the custom, the inland revenue. We have the teachers, the lecturers, everything in there. If we really separate them, actually the pure government servant that serve the government perhaps is less than 500,000.
Right, but there's also another, a threat here. I mean, or at least naysayers are saying that it could lead to higher taxes or cuts in other public services sectors. Your thoughts?
This increment only involve 10 billion ringgit increase in budget every year. And actually, before this, in the budget 2023, the government announced a temporary increment of 100 ringgit to every government servant, and that involved 1.5 billion. So overall, the increment is 11.5 billion. Out of our budget is about nearly 400 billion. So it will not increase the tax, but nevertheless, it reflects that the government may not be prioritizing the expenses. I mean, they could use this money for other more priority project, for example. But actually, if you look at the broader perspective, this increase will become a good stimulus in the economy in terms of the multiply effect. It will also create a positive sentiment in the economy, confident, and most importantly, it will also incentivize the private sectors to follow up. So, and overall, actually, our challenge in Malaysia is we want to improve the well-being of the people. And to improve the well-being of the people, we either increase their income or reduce their cost of living. Reducing cost of living is almost impossible. So the only way is to increase income. So if we can make sure that employees get increase in their income in the medium terms, we will make sure that every household in Malaysia will improve their well-being.
Right. We're going to talk about inflation. If you can't address inflation, increase that salary in a sense, right? But that's going to be for another topic, I suppose.
Inflation is at 2%, so we don't have to worry.
It's not bad, actually.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's, in a way, it's adjusting for inflation as well, this salary
That's
hike,
right,
right?
yes.
So the government, with this announcement, it's also linked the salary hike to performance-based incentives, rather. And so, yeah, you talked about how we should incentivize workers, government servants, in any way, and in this way, monetary terms, which is probably the best way to go about it. So, how will they ensure that this increase leads to a long-term, uptick or more productivity from
rather than
government servants?
complacency?
Oh yes,
Yeah.
I mean, in the World Competitive Index measure, Malaysia did worse in two aspects. One is in productivity of the workers. The other one is in public service. So we desperately need to improve the public service in Malaysia. And so when Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister announced this, he said that this is like a carrot and stick incentive program.
Yep.
So he has actually emphasized that the civil servant must perform, and their performance will be measured objectively. I look at the scheme of performance measure. It could be much stricter than most of the private sector. And he has increased, for example, the performance level. Before, with 70% performance, you are eligible to be promoted. But now it goes up to 85%. That means very few more people will qualify. And then if you don't reach 60%, before, you cannot be promoted. Now it is raised to 75%. And if you're in the third category, then there will be possibility that they may be demoted or may be terminated within 18 months. Before it was 36 months. So.
Right. Prof, one last question before we go into the next topic of interest. We talk about, having to make the public service sector more competitive. How would that affect the private sector? Would that actually, risk the economic stability of our country here? Because a lot of people tend to go to the private sector to have more,
more
money, better career progress and stuff like that. So how would this impact that?
Well, actually, our private sector in Malaysia also needs some
competition.
overhaul, yes, because only the 10,000 employers that are doing so well, and that has actually pushed up our average.
Right.
And on average, we are doing so well. But if you look at the other 1 million employers, they are doing very poorly. So the issue now, the challenge is how to push them up. And this is part of the agenda in the PuTERA 2035, actually, yes.
Like, I think the best way, if we want to make sure that the competition remains healthy and that we can continue to boost the below average performing, employers in the private sector, I think, number one, we must do away with the minimum wage policy. I just feel that has to be taken out of the picture.
Actually, now they are going to increase the minimum wage from 1,500 maybe to 2,000. And if they do that, there will be many businesses that will
Exactly,
close.
yes.
The group of this Tadika operator that came to see me yesterday, they were saying that they will have to close business
Yep.
very soon, even at the current 1,500.
Something to ponder.
I was just about to say.
Yep.
And more for probably another topic, another episode, I suppose. Minimum
For another
wage
day.
for another day. Anyway, thank you again, Professor. But still, do stay on
Right,
because
okay,
we want to segue into our next topic, which is on online safety.
That's great. Yeah. Now, internet safety has never been more important. The internet can be such an unforgiving place, especially for children, aside from the more obvious risks such as online bullying, grooming, or device addiction. The way that children are engaging with the online world means that we have to take stock of their mental health and well-being, the type of content that they are consuming and what they're posting online, which is why empowering parents and everyone else too is essential in these more modern and sophisticated times. So first, Dato, can you share with us what this call to action to empower parents and nations in the digital age entails?
Let me just give you a little bit of a background of how this all came into my investment radar. Possibly about 16, 17 years ago, I was speaking in South Korea, and I met two global leaders, one from the United States and one from New Zealand. And before we went up on the stage, they asked me, do you have any children? And I said, well, I have two young girls. And they said, whatever you do, be very mindful of social media that's coming on stream at the time, because it's very damaging to young girls. I then went back, or came home to Malaysia, and my late mother, who's a pediatrician, who is always very interested in ensuring proper cognitive development, ensuring children read, was one of the things that she felt very strongly about. And I spoke to her about these issues, and she had a very clear policy of no screens to any child until 3 years old, because it impairs cognitive development. And what we could see just from our friends and around us is that many people hand a phone to a child in order to keep them entertained, not knowing the damage that it's doing to children. So this is how I sort of fell into looking at this issue. And then when we looked at COVID, some of the more, the schools with more resources were providing online school. And then you had online homework. And what was very clear is that more and more kids were becoming fatigued with screen usage.
Right.
And we had screens for a very long time compared to many parts of the world. So with that, I started looking at some of the impact on some of the children, even adults during COVID, which pushed me into analyzing and almost going into a research project on what was happening globally. I then also saw, which was very worrying, is some of my own friends' children, they started self-harm. And by this, the little sharpener with the little blade, they would take that out and then they would just cut themselves. And
But to meet a challenge or to...
it could be for any reason.
Right.
Sometimes it was they didn't like their bodily image. Some of it was for a challenge. Some of it was bullying. And I couldn't understand why there were more and more, especially young girls, but it's not only the young girls, who were doing this. Why were they harming themselves? Why were they so angry with how they looked? I mean, this is, of course, many women are always under pressure, because of the way that, the films are, the magazines are, everybody looks so fantastic. And then when you have, the launch of the internet, people have their internet life, right? They show the best part of their life, and some people look at it and they feel that they have such a rotten life because, this person is in this fancy spot or eating fancy food or whatever it is.
Yep.
So this is where my research really started to take shape. I then started seeing more and more very tragic deaths, even families couldn't even have an extension cord in their house for fear that the children will use it. I mean, it was getting that bad. So with that, many parents are not aware of how dangerous the internet is.
Yeah.
I then started to look at the global leaders, and I was very fortunate through my US friends, and after writing my book in the US, to reach out to one of the, she's not alone in highlighting these issues, but I was able to speak to and interview Frances Haugen.
Right.
And Frances was able to explain to me some of the areas that, as parents, we need to know, and we don't know. And we are up against thousands of engineers who are designing apps or AI to keep us on the screen. And you may ask, why is that so important? Well, it comes down to money. So basically what happens is that the longer you're on the screen, the more the advertisers will pay the app provider. It's not a subscription model, so people are not subscribing to it. It's all free.
Watch time. That's the prime the monetary value. There,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
And so you have children or even young adults, teenagers who then are able to create some sort of sensational story. People follow it,
Yep.
and then they become an influencer. And then the ADEX or the advertisers will go to them and pay them to advertise their product. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. And how do you get people to follow you? Sometimes it's so outrageous. We had a case here with some of the schools as a parent. This was a few years ago. And it was a tragic event that they started, having photographs of some of their schoolmates. They then circulated it. And then you had pedophiles involved in this. So we are faced with very serious problems with our children. We cannot ignore this. We cannot think that it's not hitting our shores. We have to talk about it. We have to have these conversations. I don't think there's anybody in this country who's not worried about their children, their choo-choo, their nieces, nephews.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's worried about it because the fights that go on in families about the phone, about the screen, is incredible.
Yeah.
Sleep deprivation. We already talked about being on screens all day for school and having to do homework online. All these things caused fatigue. Now you're having children who are going to bed at 12, 1, 2. Ridiculous hours. They're not sleeping properly. And then they go to school and they're tired. They're unable to learn. I think, Prof, there was this recent announcement that 10,000 children did not take the SPM.
Right.
Yes.
I mean, you ask yourself, what are we doing wrong? We need to get people back into education. We need to get people excited to be wanting to read books. So with this, I feel that we need to have these conversations. We need to have the education. AI is moving so fast. We need to know what exactly AI is being pushed to us. We need to know, now they're coming into the deep fake, where they are cutting your head off and they're putting it on somebody else's body. They're using your voice to call people to say, online scam, please send me money. Before it was just a text.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's your voice. Now it's your face. They're getting more and more sophisticated. And if you look at some of the violence that we've seen in countries, for, the way that it's portrayed, the way that they portray a photograph, the way that they portray a photograph and then they, focus on certain parts of it just to stimulate anger, stimulate fear, that we are seeing more and more of this all over the world.
That is true. That is true. So what's the first step then, Shireen? I think for number one, the parents which obviously here is a big factor in all of this, to make sure that that they can safeguard their children properly accordingly. But what's the first step here, especially towards education of the general public?
What's going on? Well, I think that there are a few steps I feel, but I'm not the expert. I've just done a lot of research. But the first few things is, of course, when they're very small, till the age of 3, do not give them a screen. If you want your children to read, give them storybooks.
Right.
Find those storybooks, put them on the floor, let the child go and pick up that book. So that they get used to turning the page, they get used to reading, and you should also be reading to the child. Anybody should be reading so that they hear it. The second thing that I've learned is that parents need to know they're not alone. They have to know that they are up against all these AI engineers who are designing apps to keep you online. So you can't feel that this is just your failing as a parent, which is normally what we feel. You know, the minute our child doesn't do something right, you think it's my fault. Actually, this is something that's happening everywhere. You speak to most parents anywhere in the world, they'll say, oh my goodness, if you have a teenager or a young child, even 10-year-old children now are worried about skincare. I mean, it's unheard of.
But that's what the social media has brought us, right? I mean, it has influenced us into thinking that we are not enough in that sense. That's the digital, I suppose, addiction that we face ourselves. But it's hard to block. It's hard to block this sort of like transformative kind of power.
Well, I think, one of the things that I've learned is that there's something, in the United States, Silicon Valley, where all the billionaires, the big tech boys, what are they doing differently? Well, sadly to know, those people, those very, very wealthy people, schools don't allow phones. They absolutely do not allow phones until the 8th grade. So, when you have kids who are not allowed a phone until they're 14, 15, some states are even talking about 16, this will dramatically change things. Of course, some parents say, oh, it's a safety, things like that. But you don't need to be on the phone all the time, or you could just, I understand now phones are being made where you can just do parent to child phone call message. No surfing the internet. I mean, these are some of the things. Of course, I do feel that now the conversation has started. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful that I was able to meet Francis. I'm so grateful that I was able to speak with Professor Taylor Owen, who he himself has led commissions where they have talked about the governance of online, they call it online harm, and how we can start having, grouping together so that we can then look at these issues and share resources across countries. Because the tech giants are so powerful, they're almost as powerful as some countries. And that's what's worrying. And at the end of the day, you talk about ESG, you talk about sustainability. How much of these tech giants are taking this into account?
Right.
The damage that is happening. When you see some of the recent developments in the United States with where they've called some of these tech giants in, you'll see parents there who have lost their children because of social media.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because we recently had our I suppose, unfortunate incident with the TikToker that committed suicide, and then the offender was only left with just ringgit fine because
A slap on the wrist.
yeah,
really.
slap on the wrist because of our, I suppose, the punitive actions are not necessarily great yet, and this is where the update needs to be really looked into. You mentioned about Francis, right? He's supposed to come here soon, sometime
Correct.
in September.
Yeah, so I'm really happy that I was able to do that introduction to bring Francis and Professor Taylor to the key decision makers so that they can hear how to shape this and how to shape the conversations. Because next year, Malaysia is the chair of ASEAN. ASEAN is 600 million people. When you have 600 million people speaking as a voice, Or even, Malaysia has the other advantage is that we're part of Commonwealth. So being part of ASEAN, being part of Commonwealth, and you see with the developments in Canada, you're seeing the developments in Australia. I know there's some in the United Kingdom, although they're going to be addressing them after what's happened in London. I think that we need to come together. We need to have these conversations, shape what we need to say so that we can go to these big tech giants and say, look, what safety measures do you have for us? Your safety measures, if any, are in English and American English. We have so many dialects. We have so many languages across the region.
Right.
In Malaysia, in East Malaysia, they're all different. And all those racial slurs and hate speech is able to get through because there's no stopping them. And this is what needs to be addressed. So if I go back to your question about parents, I think for parents, somehow or other, they need to start this movement within their schools about no phones till a certain age, at least a 14, 15. We need to try and make sure that parents are able to, or maybe this is something for conversation when they have the conference, is to talk about how can we monitor to see how many kids are actually online at 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And where are they residing? And I mean, I do think that these are the conversations these experts will bring to us, and how can we address it? How can we monitor it?
Right.
And how can we prepare for next year so that Malaysia leads this? I think that we're in a perfect position to do it, and we need to do it.
So people like Francis is instrumental really for us to learn from, and this conference couldn't come any sooner, right?
Yes, and Professor Taylor, because he's
Right.
actually helped draft laws. So I think that these conversations are going to be very useful. I hope that many parents are able to watch the conference or follow up on the media coverage, because it's going to be educational also for journalists and also for those influencers on the internet, where they're going to start to realize that they need to start asking some questions.
Right. And the conference in question here is set by the Legal Affairs Division, or also known as BAIU, under Datuk Sri Azalina's ministry, in collaboration with MCMC and the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. They are organizing the International Legal Conference on Online Harm, set to take place September 5th and 6th.
Yeah, very soon.
Yeah, very soon. So, I mean, I suppose from this particular engagement, Dato' or Shireen, what are the expected outcomes, apart from what you just mentioned, that we need to really look into a certain bill, per se, that needs to be...
Yes, I think there
taking
is talk of that, although, I'm not in a position to... I'm not with the government, and I'm not a lawyer. But I do think that there will be some areas, as you correctly pointed out, that the tragic death of the TikToker and the fine for somebody who had caused it was so low.
It's like an oversight.
Well, no, I think the thing is that the internet has moved at such a rapid speed, and we have these providers from various countries. So we've got influence from the United States through theirs, and we've got influence some Russian-owned, China-owned. So, and one of the downsides is, of course, the speed of the internet. The faster our internet is, the more people are able to watch things in a shorter time. So, when you're actually on a slow internet, it has some advantages because people just don't have the patience. Now people read something, they read a few lines and they think that they know what's going on. They don't want to read the whole article. They just want to read snippets. So I'm hoping that these conversations that are going to take place shortly are going to really spur the development of what we need, which is some regulation on platforms, so that if people create such, devastating impact on another individual, there's something that we can do about it. Because right now, whether children are, with this deep fake, are being harmed, And many of them don't know what to do. They're already young. They can't deal with it. They feel there's something wrong with them. I was just listening to how they have this new app, which you can put your face into, and then it will change the app to suggest to you what kind of plastic surgery you should do.
Right.
And this is for young children.
Mm.
I mean, 10-year-olds and 11-year-olds.
Mm.
I couldn't imagine of anything worse.
Right. Right. I mean, just to sort of be fair, right? Because you mentioned regulation, and obviously this is going to be there's going to be a lot of talk about creating new laws, right, to make sure that everything is all in place. But like a lot of people have also argued that with more regulations, we're taking away some of the freedom
Of choice.
freedom of choice, speech, to express yourself. I mean, that is really what the internet's all about, isn't it? That people can really say what they want.
It's like a symbol
So-
of liberty. Of
But
sorts
how would
sometimes.
you counter that in terms of you're advocating for safety, and I know that which is important. But how would you counter the argument? Well, it shouldn't be at the expense of our freedom and right of expression.
I don't think that this is one or the other.
Okay.
I really don't. And I think that this is what the experts are going to share. It is not about you're not allowed to express yourself. But for example, there are certain civil laws, criminal laws that you're not allowed to do, right? It's the way society behaves. So you're allowed to drive a car, you're allowed to open a bank account, but you're also not allowed to go and knock somebody over and just walk off, right? And you're not allowed to open a bank account and then, keep on running into debt and then just walk away.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that it's one or the other. I do think that this is where, Professor Taylor and Francis and the other speakers who are coming in are going to share the experiences of what's happened in Canada, in Australia. And hopefully we will then be making the right decisions, taking all their knowledge so that we don't have to go through other mistakes, because we've got to catch up.
Right.
And because AI is moving so fast,
Right.
we need to be at the forefront of this.
Right.
And we can't say, oh no, this is going to curtail, therefore we can't look at it. We have to look at it. Otherwise, our future of our children, who will be the next generation, and Professor who's worried about income, we're going to have a huge amount of money that's going to be spent on mental health, because people are going to be so depressed and so angry.
Right. We have to wrap up. I'm so sorry to rush everyone, but I do want to touch on this particular question, because you did mention Malaysia's going to chair the next ASEAN summit, right? But what better than to lead by example, right? First, to kind of spur or set the discourse, get everyone involved. But it takes a leader to also influence the members of within the region to also be on board in this particular, not say fight against digitization, but ensuring a safety net for the users, right? How can we be better leaders in this context?
Well, I think that the first step is, of course, to have these conversations. We need to have the robust conversations, and we need to share our culture and our cultural experiences, and they need to share theirs. And we need to find a match, right, within our own legal structure, and we need to do that within the region.
Right.
We need to have the conversations about safety in language. We need to have the conversations about children using phones, ages of children signing up for apps. They all say that you're only supposed to be a certain age when you sign up an app, but surely if somebody is an 8-year-old and they're searching up certain type of age cartoons, you would know they're an 8-year-old and not a 16-year-old, as they've said. There's got to be something. And I do feel that this is what these experts are going to be able to do. They're going to be explain their stories, and hopefully these conversations will then empower us to do what we need to be done. And then next year we champion this. We champion it with all the other countries, because it's not just us who's facing this. Everybody is facing it. I mean, look what happened in London.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's the price you pay really for the very global and interconnected world that we live in here.
So, Prof, what about you? What do you make of the advancement in technology, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence here?
Yeah.
Yes, I think AI is here to stay, and it will be penetrating it through every aspect of our life, and it can benefit us. For example, in this early childhood education, we know that there's some parents that cannot afford to send their children to the nursery. Why don't we create artificial intelligence, and we can use robotic and so on, and design a system that can be affordable and can be used by everyone in the society, household, especially in the remote area, a household that are disadvantaged, for example.
But it has to have a certain level of, I suppose, SOP, right, to know to
Yes.
ensure that it's not being abused.
Yes, of course, yes. I mean, today, we in academic are fighting against AI in education because our...
You've got ChatGPT.
Yes.
You've got data
because our
analytics.
students are using ChatGPT to cheat us in answering the exam question. But we tell ourselves that we have to be better than AI.
Well, I think I need to be clear. I'm not saying that we need to not do it. I'm just saying we need to be in control.
Yes.
We need to know what is AI, what is not, what's a deep fake, because of the implications it's having on society. So yes, it's here to stay. Nobody's asking it to be stopped. Nobody's asking it to be closed down. But we need to know, and we have the right to know. And that's the key thing. And our kids and teenagers and financial scams, and in some places, there's racial violence. All these things we need to know, is this real? Is this just being instigated?
Yeah.
So I mean, and that's the point. And if we don't have the conversations, then you can't have, well, I'm just going to close it down. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But what you do need to do is you need to have the safety measures.
There's a
It's
certain level
inevitable,
of
really.
yeah, and a
Yeah.
certain level of responsibility that we must consider as well, especially with everything within our grasp, right? Everything within our reach in that sense. Unfortunately, this is the end of our episode. If you like this particular episode, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Turn on that notification bell if you haven't already. You'll not only get Beyond the Headlines update, you'll get any other reports for NSC Online. Again, I would like to thank my guests here on set. First up, Professor Dr. Bajora Badai. Thank you so much, Professor, for enlightening us with your insights. Appreciate it so much. As well as Dr. Shireen, thank you so much for your, I suppose, it's a reminder for us to also be responsible users and
Of the
also
internet.
to check,
Yeah.
check our surroundings, check our community. You might not know to what extent they are actually facing this sort of like attack, especially when the online world is so invincible in that sense.
That's true.
Right?
And Amanina, just before we go, again, I'd just like to remind our viewers, the conference is going to be on September the 5th and 6th. It's going to be on online harms. So yeah, do watch for that one. Watch out for that one. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Again, I would like to thank Dato' Shireen for being here with us. Thank you so much, Dato'.
My pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
And thank you so much, Haswin.
Always
for
a
being
pleasure.
Here
Thank you,
with
Amanina.
me.
Yeah.
All right. Do follow us on X, Instagram, Facebook, as well as Threads. My name is Amalina Kamal, and I'll see you next week.